I think they're very powerful to use. I am not a phantom stock hater at all, but I just will say I would be careful with them. And I would also research all options and think about what your true goal is.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we look at what is changing in the industry and take you to the front lines of those that are driving those changes. As always, I'm Donnie Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. And with me is my compadre in arms, Mr. Dan Gordon. But Dan, before I let you do your thing where you talk about all your fun stuff that you do, first of all, we're recording this on Monday morning, and I can just tell you, I have just been having one heck of a blast. And the reason I've been having a blast is because Mr. Gordon has been on the struggle bus with technology this morning. So for those of you that are joining us on YouTube, you're just going to see my ugly mug, but you will not see Dan because he's been fighting with Zoom all morning, and I have been thoroughly entertained.
Well, I just want to thank you for that. And it's some camera issues. The ironic part is I got up a little early and shaved so that I wouldn't look like a gorilla after the Super Bowl. And now my camera doesn't work, but the show must go on.
The show must go on.
So let's go. So anyway, so this episode is sponsored by Coal March by WorkWave. And what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to give you a framework for some performance-based compensation, and Donnie is going to whine about this performance-based compensation. But
I am not going to whine about it.
What we're talking about is phantom stock, and I thought this would be an extremely interesting topic as we use this as a tool to incentivize our team members at our accounting firm, and have also worked with several attorneys to implement these programs for several of our clients. So the reason that I like this, that both Donnie and I have used phantom stock as a tool to try to align the interests of a key employee. That's what you're doing. You're aligning your interests with your employees, and so you're both going to work toward the success of the company. So both of us have separate opinions on our experience and the different results. So anyway, I will open up with I'll open up with phantom stock. And basically what I did is I took the outline from a phantom stock arrangement that we have with one of our folks that was created by an attorney who is a specialist at doing some of this. But phantom stock is a powerful incentive tool for top managers where the manager receives a future cash payment tied to the value of a designated number of company shares without actually receiving any physical stock or membership interests.
So let's just be clear here for our listeners.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear the term phantom stock, there is no such thing as stock. Okay. I mean, in the sense of something that's going to be recognized by the IRS or even, company ownership, it is deferred comp. That's what phantom stock is. And so, by the way, and we need to say this, Dan, because, let's just be real here. Neither of us are attorneys. At least yes. I'm not an attorney. Number two, I would say learn from, by the way, I don't, if you didn't catch this at the beginning of the episode, Dan is totally, he's throwing me like I'm like Ruth Bader here, like I'm going to disagree with him, which, by the way, I am going to disagree with him a lot because we were talking about this episode beforehand and I was like, he's like, oh, it's great. And I'm like, what? And so I already know we're not going to be, there's going to be a few things here that we're not going to totally agree with, but bringing it back.
I'm not sure how Ruth Bader got
because I am dissenting from your opinion, my friend. I don't.
And that's what she did.
That's what she did. That's what she did.
Okay.
And some might even argue maybe I even look like Ruth Bader. I don't know.
Yeah, a little old lady. So.
So we're not experts. I do want to say that. And number two is that anything that we say about phantom stock, you definitely want to back it up with, I would say, an attorney and also a comp expert. And so, and I would say, I'm going to talk about some mistakes that I have made with this, because Dan is correct. I have used this form of compensation in the past. I no longer use this form of compensation. I'm sure it works in a lot of situations. In my situation, I feel like there are better vehicles to accomplish what I was trying to achieve. And so that, don't take any of this to say that I think it's a bad idea. I just think the situation has to be right. And you got to have a really good, clear picture of how it's going to essentially align your goals with the goals of those who are on your team. And so with that, Dan, take it away. We can start at least get into the benefits.
Yeah. So think of it as a tracking vehicle. So it tracks the stock. So it's a very flexible tool. Basically, let's say that you have a manager or a top person that you want to reward and that you want to keep and whatnot. But at the end of the day, if I gave you 5% of the company, what does that mean to you? Well, you might take on some liability because now you're an owner. Unless we have some sort of arrangement for voting shares, you really have no influence on what's going on in the company unless you have 51%, right? If I give you stock, that's a taxable event based on the valuation. So I would have to do a valuation of the business. And so there's a number of roadblocks to actually giving stock out. And also what happens if things go bad? How do I get my stock back? So phantom stock is a powerful incentive. Okay. And when I say future cash payments tied to the value of a designated number of shares. So let's say I was going to give you 5%. We're going to go into how you can get this 5% because you don't have to give it all at once. It allows you to track the value of a stock. So let's say we have a company that's worth $1 million and I want to give you 5%. So your tracking is $50,000. Okay. However, we value the company. But I can also actually give you 5% of net income every year if you design it that way. I can give you 5% of it upon sale of the company. I can give you 5% of it if you retire from the company. I can pay you out in a lump sum, or I can pay you out in a structured settlement, that kind of thing. So it's a pretty powerful tool, and the value is typically tied to the market value of the company's stock or an assigned value. So in other words, let's say I give you 5% and then we go and sell the company. Well, it's easy to value the 5% because you sold the company. But let's say you retire. So how do we know what the value is? We use a formula, and that formula is, I don't want to say it's arbitrary, but it is arbitrary. You can come up with it any way that you have or any way that you want. So there's usually a triggering event that gets you your payout if you're the manager. That's once vesting has occurred, which I don't recommend. I recommend that upon the sale of the company or upon retirement of the company, because you can use a phantom arrangement as golden handcuffs. And there's many ways that you can do it.
Hang on one second here, Dan. There's a couple of things that I want to clarify, because what you just talked about, there's a lot in there. And I just want to make sure our listeners are tracking. So the first thing is that phantom stock, and I said this earlier, it's deferred comp, which means you can create the rules of the game. And it's really important that you know that, because it's not like, I would highly recommend you not do this. You could have someone that you want to retain, and you say, okay, I'm giving you 10% phantom stock now. I would not recommend you do that. There's several arrangements that you can do. When I did this, I did it based on performance, and then there was an earn in, and there was a percentage earn in, assuming that we hit goals. And then on top of that earn in, there was a vesting period as well. It was a 5-year vesting period before that actually transferred into to be payable phantom stock. So that's the first thing, is that, it's phantom stock. So you can create all the rules of the game. Make sure that you don't, you do whatever you want. I would highly recommend you not just give it out, right? Because it just,
no, you definitely don't give it out. You don't just give it out.
The second thing, which Dan said, and I think this is really important, and I just want to highlight it again, is you need to make sure that you determine how value is going to be determined upon the payout of that phantom stock. And that needs to be in writing. You could say, well, we're going to get it appraised, and we're going to do it based on EBITDA, or we're going to do it based on revenue, or whatever. But the reality of it is that I would clearly define how you're going to determine value upon this triggering event that he's talking about, whether it be a retirement or it be hitting certain goals, whatever. Just make sure that that's clear, because
if it's the sale of a company, that's easy, right?
It's
because
very easy
we know what it's worth,
right?
But you need to create a formula, and that formula may or may not have anything to do with market reality, right? So we know that we're coming off one of the greatest boom, we may be coming off one of the greatest boom times in M&A history in the pest space, and the lawn space is actually coming on pretty strong too right now. But maybe 5 years from now or 10 years from now, that may be all different. It may be worth even more than it's worth today, or it may be worth less. But I recommend that you create a formula, and that could be based on EBITDA, a multiple of EBITDA. It could be based on a multiple of revenue. I don't recommend that you do that without considering EBITDA. Or it can just be a number that you decide that that's what the number is. But you've got to establish that valuation. And one of the things that Donnie was just alluding to, you could have a valuation done. I would tell you that valuations, unless you're doing estate planning or you're getting a divorce or something, most of those valuations have nothing to do with market value.
That was actually where I was going with that point. Just, how many times I know back when I would work with specific clients, how value is determined is a really important point. And if you use a professional appraiser, most likely, I'm not saying always, but most likely it's going to get praised lower than what it actually will get on the market. And so that's why I say it's really important for you to define exactly how you're going to value the business, because Dan's right. I've seen owners, and I'm not making a judgment opinion either way, who have intentionally got professional valuations because they were going through let's just call it an event, a life event, and they needed to understand what the value of their business was. And so they knew that would come in lower. So that's what they did. So hopefully what I just said makes sense.
Well, but as long as everyone understands that it may not be fair market value, that it may be enterprise value, which is a formula, there's a financial formula to figure out, if I have a company that's worth $1 million and, I want a certain ROI, then I can back into that number. It has very little to do with market value, or you can just go with market value.
So the big picture here is that you're going to try to retain a key person by giving them, quote unquote, a percentage of the company, or the opportunity to earn a percentage of the company
without ownership,
and without tax consequences while they're doing it. And I think that's really important, because if you have a fairly large business and you end up giving someone real stock, that's going to create problems for them tax wise. But nonetheless, so you give them that, you set up the game. Now what? Okay.
So by the way, that don't just gloss over the tax consequences, because that's huge. If I have a company that's worth $1 million and I'm going to give you 5%, that $50,000 is that's taxable income to you without any money to pay.
That's right.
So that's phantom income. Yeah. So, and the other thing is that, however, this is a really important point. So if I did that, and you took the income, and you were taxed on the $50,000, and 10 years from now it's worth $150,000, you have $100,000 capital gain, which is significantly, capital gains are taxed significantly less than ordinary income, right? With phantom stock, all it is compensation. It's all ordinary. So if that 50,000 climbs to 150, all of that 150 is taxed at ordinary income. Okay. So there's honestly, as an employer, you're actually getting a better tax benefit from it, because you're getting the whole deduction of the 150 as opposed to the giving out the $50,000.
And that what you just said is really a function of, and it goes back to, this is truly deferred comp. It's compensation. Yes. And so when it comes out, meaning when it gets paid out, it's no different than as if you paid them a bonus in one regard. I mean, I'm sure the tax, but what I mean is like, there are no capital gains, because again, it's not an investment. It is actual compensation that you're paying out. It's just the vehicle. You can call it whatever you want, but that's, again, that's the main thing I want to bring home, is that it's going to get taxed at compensation rates, not at capital gains. Very good point. So,
right. The other thing that you can do, and this is pretty neat, is let's say I want to give you 5%. And so what I do is I'm going to give you 1% per year for 5 years, but I'm going to have a vesting period. So that first year, so let's say I have 5-year vesting for each 1%. So in year one, you're going to work for 5 years till you earn that year one. And these numbers are pretty significant, in case you're asking, well, why would anyone do this? Because the idea is you're aligning with long-term value of the company, right? So I'm going to give you 1% in 5 years. So then I'm going to give you another 1% in 6 years and another in 7 years, right? Until you get your full 5%. Think about what that does if you leave the company. If you're the manager that you leave the company, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So you're going to think twice about it. So what it is what it's doing is long-term, it's keeping you, it's putting those golden handcuffs on, because you're going to lose a ton of money if you leave, without fully vesting. So that's important. So how do you want to just give somebody this 1% for 5 years because they're good guys, and just, they're with you, or do you want to define it? And that's the most important thing, is how you define it. So you can define it with growth measures, margin, gross margin, net margin, whatever, other profitability, any line item on the P&L, or any other metric that you can use. And so that's really important too, to understand that.
I just, I will say this from just when I did this, and by the way, I don't do this anymore, just a disclaimer for our listeners. When I did this, I used what I call the composite score. Now, Dan is very familiar with what that is, but for our listeners who have never heard that term, it's a made up term, but essentially what it is, it's profit percent plus growth percent. And the reason I like that stat so much is if you take revenue growth as a percentage, and then you take profit as a percentage, it gives, especially if this is a key person who can control those two stats, right? You may have a person who can't control growth, or who can't control expenses, or whatever, right? But for me, Dan was talking about this, you have to define what are the rules of the game for the person to earn in. Well, number one is, I wouldn't give it. You could do it just solely based on profit, which is perfectly fine. You could do it based on growth, which is perfectly fine. For me, I like the balanced approach where, I gave them latitude. If it was a growth year, then they could spend that composite on growth. If it was hey, we need to take some profit, they could still earn in, because at the end of the day, growing a business profitably is hard work. And, depending on what I didn't want to have happen is me come back and redefine it every single year. And so I did it based on composite score, not telling you should do that, but that is just one option. And I thought that the actual performance side of things, I thought worked pretty well.
But by the way, for anybody who, following this composite thing, if you're one of our clients, we give that to you on your reports, and we call it the rule of 23, which we kind of stole from Working because they use it. And the rule of 23 is that the composite's 23. You have 23% profit and 0% growth, or vice versa, or 10, 13, some function of that. But the reason that composite is actually so brilliant is because you can choose, do I want growth at the expense of profit, or do I want profit at the expense of growth? And you can choose what you want. And, by saying that you've got these 23 points, or, in Donnie's case, he does the rule of 30, and we also have clients who do rule of 30 and even better, but that's why we use it. So how is a phantom stock arrangement implemented? And this is so, we use it, and we brought a compensation attorney in to develop it. And what he did was he created an employment agreement where the phantom stock piece was a component of the employment agreement. So we have an attorney drafting this employment agreement. And several, I'm just pulling some of the bullet points, some of the various paragraphs in that employment agreement. We talk about employment at will clause, which is extremely important, right? In other words, you're not guaranteed that you're going to be here forever. Okay. We give you a base salary. There's opportunities to earn short-term bonuses. Remember, this phantom stuff is long-term, unless you create the component where you say, okay, you're going to get 1% for 5 years, and each 1% that you get, then you take where you share in the profit. So if in year, if I've already earned 1%, I get 1% of the profit. If I'm up to 5, I get 5% of the profit. You don't need to do that, but you can. Or it can be just a regular bonus program, just like, if you exceed certain things as a manager. So you've got the base salary, you've got bonuses and or commissions, and then you have the deferred comp piece, the phantom stock. And usually you show that as an exhibit to this award letter, right? Or you create an award letter that's an exhibit of this employment agreement. And then there's a whole bunch of things that you need to consider, like termination. What happens if you quit? What happens if you get fired? Who determines what if you get fired and it's not for cause, or if it is for cause, or whatever? Maybe you have a fight with an ownership family member or something like that, right? So you define things like that. It'll also talk about the benefits that you get: health, life, disability, 401k. Hang on.
Let's go back to this termination part. For those of you who are considering this and you're going to do it, or you decide that you want to spend a lot of time on that termination.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by that is defining what is cause and for cause and what's not for cause. Because one of the things that I wanted to make sure of that was very clear, you have any, what I consider to be moral indiscretions, you embezzle from the company, you do something dishonest, like you're fired for cause, this all goes away. I'm not paying someone who for whatever reason, did something that was against our values or was dishonest, or, again, I mean, just imagine for a moment you didn't have this all cleared out and someone embezzles from you and you have this agreement in place. And not only do you get the job of cleaning up whatever that is, now you also get to pay them out. So it's really clear that you make sure that this section, if you do this, spend some time on this section is all I'll say. So.
And also on what happens, right? So let's say you've earned 2% of the 5% and you get fired for cause. Do you get to get paid out on that 2%, or do you lose it, right? You can define it any way you want. You just have to define it.
Yep.
And here, this is one that, let's go to the last one, and then I'll come back to the one prior. So in your employment agreement, I highly recommend that you have a non-compete, which is being attacked right now, whether actually it's been non-competes have been attacked for a long time. So that may or may not be fully enforceable, but non-solicits, those are enforceable. Don't go after my customers. If you leave, don't go after my employees. And then the third one is a non-disparage. Don't be out there trashing my company to anyone. Okay. So those are pieces of that employment agreement. Now, the last one, and this is really, we just had a situation that's why this is near and dear. Spousal death benefit. Okay. You have a key man and he's in the middle of his, phantom earn out or earn in,
hang on,
whatever.
Let's bring it up. It's key person now.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a key person. Actually, no, you Google it. It's key man. But, when you look in a history book, is it mankind?
I don't.
Person kind.
I'm just having fun with it.
All right.
It is called key man insurance for our listeners.
Yes.
That's correct. It is called that.
But what happens if your guy or gal dies, right, or becomes incapacitated? And that happened to one of our clients when he was the guy was cranking, the company was doing great. And about halfway through this term of his earnout, he contracts cancer and a bad case, a very bad aggressive form, and dies. Now what happens? What happens to the spouse? Okay. And you can define that, and you can guard against that with insurance, and they call that key man insurance, basically, where I buy a policy on you, I'm the company, and I am the beneficiary. And what happens is I buy that, I'm the beneficiary. If you die, I get the money, and I am compelled to use that money to buy you out of this long-term comp arrangement. So, and depending on age, health, and everything else, this insurance could be expensive. And a lot of people are like, maybe I don't need it. I am telling you, we went through a situation and it was gut wrenching, but luckily we had this key man insurance to buy out the spouse.
And I would say it's the right thing to do. At the end of the day, I have always used this insurance is term insurance. It's term life insurance. It's not that expensive. Dan is correct. Mm-hmm. If you're older, it could be a little pricey, but comparative to what could happen, it's not that expensive. And so I would say, always any kind of agreement, any kind of partnership, and believe me, when you put in a stock, a phantom stock agreement, now you're a partner. You always have buy sells and always have policies to back up, because at the end of the day, that's a pretty dirty thing. If the family, if this person's been working for you and they've been staying and being loyal to you and producing results for you, and then they end up dying for whatever reason, it could be a car accident, who knows? And then the family's kind of left there like, wait a minute. And you're like, oh yeah, that person's gone now. Just not a good way to.
Right. So that key man insurance, and
exactly.
I would definitely, and there's other compensation arrangements that you use whole life and whatnot. You talk to your broker about that, but that's really important stuff. So, okay, so that's what is in the arrangement. So what that exhibit that I was telling you that is basically the deferred comp, or the phantom award letter. So what's in that award letter? Well, it's a description of the award, number of units or shares of stock in the vesting period, right? The key metric to achieve that in order to earn in, whether it's growth or profit or whatever, okay? The payout upon the sale of the company or change of control in the company or retirement. And remember, these things can be pretty significant. So you've got to figure out, well, if it's upon retirement, do I give you a lump sum? Or maybe it took you 10 years to earn it and I'm going to pay out over 10 years, which is perfectly fine if it's structured that way, because now you have this retirement income. Okay.
Let me just say something real quick, because this is really important. I would highly recommend that you pull it out, that it not be a lump sum. And the reason is because of the what we talked about earlier, which is the non-compete, non-solicit, non-disparaging. It gives you another tool to ensure that how you want it to unwind is exactly how it's going to go down. So,
and that's an outstanding point. And you don't usually come up with too many of those. So
even a blind squirrel, buddy.
That's it. So anyway, the other, you would have a vesting schedule.
Yeah.
That surviving spouse clause. And then evaluation. What is the formula? We talked about it, but upon sale, that's easy. But upon retirement or leaving the company for whatever, you want to understand that valuation. Then you'll have a clause for forfeiture if you do something like get fired for cause or disparage or something else. And then the last one, and this is really important because, a lot of times you'll be running the company and you'll have a key person and, you guys are running hard and everything and you're best buds, right? And then you decide to scale the company and get bigger. And maybe you need some other people who are going to get these arrangements. So you have to talk about the possibility of dilution, right? So I give you 5 or 10% of the company, but now I've hit success like you wouldn't believe. And now I've got 5 other people who I want to have this arrangement. Well, does that mean that each time you're going to give them 5 or 10%? Or is there going to be some sort of dilutive from an ownership perspective or from the percentage, which still may or may not be just as much money. It's just that now your company is much bigger and the value of that. So you want to talk about a dilution, what happens with dilution. And then, so that would be in the award letter. And so those are the elements. So let's talk about the pros and cons of doing this. And I'm going to, if you do this right, everybody's in total alignment. And then I guess the negatives, the cons, and I'm going to let Donnie take this because evidently it didn't work out for him. It's working out great for us and some of the ones that we've put into effect. But I can see where, it might not live up to expectation. But why don't you go ahead and talk about what your issues were? Because I'm interested to hear.
Well, first of all, let me just say this. Who would consider phantom stock? I would say probably 99% of the cases, well, maybe that's a little high. The majority of the cases, people are looking for golden handcuffs. That's their goal, right? Golden handcuffs.
The employer is.
That's correct. That's exactly right. They're looking for a way to ensure that if they've got a key person, how do I keep them interested, engaged, and how do I keep them at the business and keep them focused on the right things? I will tell you, Donnie's opinion right now, in my opinion, there are better vehicles for accomplishing that than phantom stock. Okay. It's a great tool, not telling you not to do it. It's one of many tools, right? But to me, I did this. I thought it was great. And what I will tell you is that I got into some issues, and the issues became when I was dumping a lot of money into the business. And, by default, I was with cash exponentially creating more value for the business. And so anyone who's holding phantom stock, by nature of them breathing, gets way more value, even though the contribution is not there. Because you got to remember, they have no basis. Okay. The only basis they have is just, them being there and them helping you create that. So anyway, potential issues. Number one is that people change. Okay. You may
let's pull back because that's really interesting.
I'm going to go back to that. I promise. I am going to go back to that. But let's just big picture, like things I don't like about them. Okay. Yeah. Number one is people change. Okay. In my case, this didn't happen. When I had this agreement in, I still, everyone is still with me. I did end up changing this, but just because someone's great now, I've seen it. I've been in business since 2006, at least on the field service side of things. And I can't tell you how many times I've had someone who started, who was killing it, and the business outgrew that person because they simply did not grow with the business. And so that's one thing you really need to think about, is that if you've got a 10, 20-year timeline, you really need to think through, am I really wanting to part with a percentage of the company in deferred comp? Am I really wanting to do that? Because, they're great now. What does it look like in 10 years? And you're making a long-term commitment. So that's number one, is that people can change and situations can change. And I don't like anything, I just think there's better vehicles that don't involve the value of the business to accomplish the golden handcuffs and to reward that person. Because at the end of the day, look, the last thing I'd want to do is screw some. If someone's really helping you hit goals, of course I want to reward them. Of course I want to line them up with the business. But again, in my mind, they're better tools. Number two, the other thing I don't like about it is, if I am an owner and I've got someone on one of these deferred comp, phantom stock programs, and I'm pumping millions of dollars into the business to grow it, is that right? Because now the value of their stock just exploded because of investment that you're making. And, Dan talked about dilution, and there should be something in there for that. But the fact of the matter is that by breathing, if you're the one that's doing the majority of the growth, that's a problem in my mind. You may be okay with it. I didn't like it. I didn't like the fact that I went out and did, in my case, I did some acquisitions. I did a few other things, literally millions of dollars into the business. And by nature of breathing, now all of a sudden, the value of my phantom stock is going through the roof, even though that key person may not be creating the value. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does. So let's say that we didn't have phantom stock, but you gave me 5% of the company or whatever. So you agree to grow and there's a capital call, meaning that you have to put money in, and I put in 5% and you put in 95% or whatever, and that's fair. And what you just described is really, really interesting. And it's a real issue that you've got to determine, are we putting in personal money, or are we going out and borrowing money? How is all of that being accomplished? And you're absolutely right. But there are ways around that.
There are.
Through delusion clauses. Mm-hmm. If I start putting money in, then, you can get diluted down. Because you're right. This whole thing is all about helping us grow the business. And if I just grew the business by putting a lump of cash in and you had nothing to do with it, is that fair? That's absolutely true.
And that's a fantastic conversation to have, by the way, with a key person. Hey, I just took the value of your stock down. It's going to go great. No. So point being is that, that
you want to keep your percentage. Now, you don't want them to have equity. Loan the company at a stated interest rate, your amount. There's so many ways that you can get around this. Yeah. But maybe the guy doesn't, or the gal doesn't even have the money to do it. So it does get a little sticky.
And if you get into big numbers, you're right, Dan. By the way, you're right. You absolutely could do that. But the majority of the time when you're talking really big numbers, most people don't have that kind of cash laying around. So
they don't want to put it in. Okay. Yeah. So go ahead.
So issue number one is that people change, and this is a really long-term investment, right? And unwinding these things, they're not easy. Okay. Number two is that, if you're putting your own personal money in and this person's not, well, you're increasing their value. For me, one of the main ideas behind this vehicle is that someone is doing this work for you. They're creating value for you, right? Which is why you're giving them a percentage. So anyway, that's number two, is you put money in. Number three is that, and by the way, I didn't come up with this, but there are other vehicles out there, whether it be through an insurance policy or something else, where you can accomplish the same thing, where you could say, hey, look, you need to be with me for a set number of years. You're going to have to self-fund this bonus program, whatever it is. And at the end of the 10 years, like, you don't own it, you can have the same rules. If you do anything, this doesn't belong to you, it's going to come out. It's not as tax efficient as what Dan's talking about here, but it accomplishes the same thing. And now you can add as much money as you want. You can to the business. It's not going to put you in a position where I think someone's unfairly getting value. The other thing is that you can get everyone aligned up behind specific goals. And so to me, again, I did this. If I had to do it again, I probably would not have done it, but I learned a lot from it. And I'm not saying that you should not do it. I just think in the case of, in my case, I wanted to invest, I want to do some other things, and it just didn't work. I think if I had to be completely 100% like own it, it would be like, I should have spent more time in the dilution clauses. I didn't do that. That was my mistake. But I will say that the vehicles that we use now, it can scale to more, because again, there's only so much you can give out. I mean, think about it. You're going to give out 10% to every key person, or 20%. That's right. It really is a zero sum game, versus if you use something like insurance, like a whole life policy, which is also backing in you can still make people a really good retirement package with those vehicles as well, without the complexity, without the promises, and you don't want to end up like GM, right? And when I say that, remember back in 2009, was it 2009 when the market fell out? And it might even been before that, but they had
The whole
promised
pension
all
thing.
these pensions, exactly,
But
and it sunk the company, because
but
they made all these promises.
think about, so the beauty of a phantom stock arrangement is that it's all on paper and it's all theoretical until you pay it, right? Other long-term incentive plans require cash. Whole life policy requires you to pay a premium, and again, if the person is maybe in their 30s or 40s or 50s, and maybe high blood pressure or whatever, right? That premium can be pretty high, right? And so it's going to suck up, working capital. We have been very successful with phantom arrangements, but you're absolutely right. If your goal is to say, okay, let's create a company and grow it using operating cash, and then 5 years into it, one of the owners says, I just came into a lump of cash and I'm going to put all that money into this business and we're going to zoom to the top. Anybody with me? Well, those people have to come up with cash and might not be able to. And again, you may go into it without those plans.
Things change.
Things change.
And by the way, one thing I would say to what you just said about the insurance thing is that it does take capital. That is true. That is true. But there's one principle, if you're listening, that I want to make sure that everyone's clear on. Every bit of incentive compensation should be 100% funded by performance, meaning that whatever you align up with is that it has to be self-funded. So in my case, and again, I'm not telling you to do what I do because I make a lot of mistakes, but what I am saying is that, and what we have in place now is that everything that gets pushed out to these programs and these plans, like they go into an account, but they're self-funded. They're above and beyond what we have to hit as a business. And that's you did it. So it's an opportunity. It's a way to get everything lined up, but don't ever put yourself in a position where you're burning operation cash to fund these things. And it's like most things, right? The devil's all in the details, but I think they're very powerful to use. I am not a phantom stock hater at all, but I just will say I would be careful with them. And I would also research all options and think about what your true goal is. If your true goal is to put golden handcuffs on people and reward them for performance, there are more tools out there other than phantom stock. And phantom stock might very well be the very thing that works for you. But there are other options as well.
Phantom stock will align objectives and whatnot. And you're right, there's some issues with it, but you're right. If I want to just give you a bonus each year and have you have 5-year vesting in that, and so $50,000 a year, hey, year 6, I give you the 50,000. Well, I've locked you up for 5 years. And then each year thereafter, you have a 5-year vesting schedule. So you're accomplishing the same thing. The problem is that number doesn't ebb and flow with the growth of the business and profitability and whatnot. The other thing is, what if we do this life insurance thing and we don't hit our numbers? Now I end up with a life insurance policy on your life and you might quit. How do you unwind that?
Yeah. So one of the things that you can do, and I know we're getting towards the end here, and I don't want we're talking about phantom stock, but I will say this: there are policies out there that you own, and you can make it so that during the lifetime of the buildup, the owner is the one who owns the policy. Mm-hmm. And then once that transition happens, it is absolutely a switch. And once you flip it, it's gone. Right. But what I'm saying is that in the case that you just described, that's your saving grace. Is now it's your policy. So you get all your money back, and it's not like you're like, oh my gosh, this person is gone halfway through. They didn't get where they needed to go, and yet I'm out of this cash. It doesn't work that way. So it's, again, there are other options out there. Not telling you should or should not do them, but again, this is a fascinating topic that, I think done right, they are very great to create alignment, much like what Dan said. But I will also say that you really want to think through the details and make sure that you bring in professionals, because it's very easy to leave out a detail or two that can cost you a lot of money.
Yeah.
later on.
It's important. It's important that you have an attorney draft it and have your accountant look at it. We look at these plans all the time. I don't craft them. Attorneys craft them, and then we look at them to see, how they'll work and play out the different scenarios. So it's a very interesting topic. And but if you're thinking about it, the first place you stop, well, take a look at it, Google it. And then if you think that it's for you, then speak to an attorney. And it's something that you can definitely put in place. And it's something that you can align values and goals. And it's something that you can create wealth for key people.
I would also say ask around in the industry. This insurance thing I was just talking about was not my idea. It was someone else's that's in our industry that was their approach. And I like it very, very much. So
it's another good one. Maybe we'll do an episode on how that works.
For sure.
So.
All right. Well, you all you've managed to yet waste another 40 minutes of your life with Dan and I. As always, we appreciate any ratings and reviews that we get. You can review us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, however it is that you listen to us. And just a reminder, there will not be a shadow stock agreement up on the website, but all of our other stock, PMPindustryinsider.com. Just take a look under show notes. There'll be a summary under that. You can also get us out on YouTube. Except for this episode, you will not see Dan. You'll just see Dan Gordon with the big old font. Otherwise, you'll just see my ugly mug because he's having, he was on the struggle bus this morning. And with that, we're signing off. We'll see you all next time. Dan, anything to say before we part out here?
That's it.
All right. We'll see you all next time. Take care.
Sounds good. See ya.